There are still some open seats in front and over to the far right side of the room if you're looking for a seat. All right, welcome to the Conference on World Affairs. This is session 2315, Door Open, Door Closed, the Immigrant Experience in America. My name is Ming-Hsu Chen. I'm a professor at the University of Colorado Law School. I teach classes in immigration and citizenship law, and I myself am the child of two immigrants. I'm pleased to introduce our four panelists today, each of whom have distinct experiences with immigration. To my immediate left, we have Charlie Vanderhorst, who is a global health consultant and doctor. He is an immigrant from Holland himself, with parents who are Dutch and Holocaust survivors. I think what he'll focus on today is his experience as a physician at a free clinic that serves primarily undocumented immigrants. Second, we'll have Mary Reynolds Thompson, who is an author, a therapist, and a coach. She herself is an immigrant from England with a family that has flowed back and forth from the UK and the US. Next, we'll have Dr. Reza Ramazani, who is a professor of economics at St. Michael's. He himself immigrated to the United States as a graduate student from Iran in the midst of the 1977 revolution in search of the Golden Age. And last, we will have Zainab Zen Khan speaking. She's the president of the Muslim American Leadership Alliance. She is, like me, the child of two immigrants. Her parents are from Afghanistan and Pakistan. And she is a therapist who has worked extensively with the South Asian and Arab community. This is one of the sessions that might be experimenting with text questions. If we're having some technical difficulties right now, after the opening remarks, I'll let you know for sure if we're going to do that. If not, what we'll do is use index cards. And if our producers can just hold up their hands. What you can do on that index card is to indicate the questions that you have for the panelists when we open up for Q&A after opening remarks. If you are a student, please write that at the very top of the index cards because the tradition of CWA has always been to prioritize student questions before we open it up to the community. So I'm going to start with our opening remarks from the speakers, and if we do have the text messaging capability at the conclusion of their remarks, I'll walk through the instructions on how to do that. So please begin for us, Dr. Vanderhorst.
Thanks. It's great to be here again. Just a reminder, repeat that there's seats right here in the front row and over here to stage left. Or is that stage right? Never know. Anyways, just a couple, so feel free to walk right up front and get comfortable. Just a couple of stories. So my parents, as Ming said, were immigrants, but most importantly, my mother had false papers. So she was a Holocaust survivor, and the way she survived is she took an assumed name, got rid of the Jewish name, and picked a Ukrainian name and survived in Germany as a Ukrainian woman instead of a Jewish woman. And that name she picked was Sonia Tarasova, and she kept that name all her life. And only when she died did we put her correct name on her gravestone, which she wanted, and she agreed to do that. And another story, there's the godfather, who now passed away, of my oldest daughter, was named Bernie Greenberg, and there's a building at the School of Public Health, because he was dean of the School of Public Health there and founding member of the biostatistics department. And he told me the story of his father, who came from a small town in Russia. And the way his father entered was that when one person in the town got here with a visa, they would send it back to the town, and the next person would come in using the same visa with a name. But when Bernie's dad came through, he was so terrified that the Cossacks were going to find out that he held on to that visa and kept the fake name. So this whole quote about people entering the United States legally versus illegally is, of course, people have been doing it illegally for years. And of course, we're all immigrants. I mean, the only people who were here were the Native Americans. And so going back to the 1600s, so since 1607, 57 million people have immigrated to the United States. And if you look at their descendants, that's 200 million from 10 countries, and that's 2/3 of the population in the United States. So another couple of remarks I'm going to make. Immigrants pay taxes. $11.64 billion a year in state and local taxes. If we legalize the 12,000 undocumented in the United States, that would add another $2.1 billion in taxes. Immigrants do not increase the crime rate. Incarceration for a U.S.-born averaged across all ethnicities is 3.51%. Among immigrants, it's 0.86%. So they're much more law-abiding than the rest of us. Immigrants benefit and invigorate the economy. I mean, you all know that the least favorable jobs, the 24-hour shops, the green grocers, the gas station, that's the 7-Eleven, the people mowing your lawn, taking care of your parents, taking care of your children, are all immigrants. They aren't U.S. born, I mean, predominantly. Immigrant-founded companies produced $52 billion in sales and employ 450,000 workers in 2005. In fact, from 1995 to 2005, 25% of the high-tech companies had at least one immigrant founder, including Google, Tesla, Intel, and PayPal. Okay, imagine if we had our nationalistic restriction and immigration policy and we didn't have those people come in. There's also the question of people, which I think is a false canard as well, the debatable whether immigrants take jobs from people. So a perfect example is when Arizona under Jan Brewer had the crackdown on undocumented. It wasn't that the jobs all of a sudden were filled by native-born Arizonians. Instead, what happened, they had a huge job loss, and things went unpicked, unmowed, etc. And the same thing happened in Georgia when Georgia passed a law. Tomatoes were rotting on the vine, and conservative farmers woke up and said, hey, that's a bad law. The other thing is that I think, and I want to just briefly then conclude with that's talking about the U.S. undocumented, but I want to talk about the moral issue. So my grandparents were in what is now Poland, now Ukraine, but then was Poland, a small city of 36,000. Half were Jews, 18,000 at the start of World War II. They had wanted to immigrate. They knew things were bad. So my grandparents had a little more foresight than a lot of other people, and they saw the news from Germany before the invasion. They had wanted to immigrate to Palestine. And they were, you know, at that time middle class, a little, I think a cobbler shop or something like that. But the British had a huge payments you had to make in pounds. I forget, it was like 5,000 pounds, which of course no one could afford. So they both end up dying, as did my then 12-year-old aunt, my mother's sister. So, just sort of a couple things. The United States has 316 million people in it, and Germany has taken in, so far from Syria, half a million asylum seekers. It's a country of 81 million. If we took in the same amount, it would be 1.9 million. Instead, what we've taken in annually, we take in 70,000. Now, the people, those of you who haven't seen the photo of the dead child on the beach, then, this whole idea that these people are like economic migrants. 250,000 Syrians have died. That would be the equivalent of several million Americans dying. A quarter of the population has been displaced in Syria and fled the country. Imagine 250,000 Americans fleeing the country because of something like that. So, we're all in this together. And there's this environment, I think, that's been more pervasive as the years have gone by, where each individual is in a little ship. But that's not true. We're all in this together. And so I think somehow my suggestions then is that for the undocumented, we need a path to citizenship. It's fine. I have no problem with them paying a fine if that's going to assuage the thing, a fine. Give them a green card, and if after a few years they don't have a felony or something, give them citizenship. I think it's actually, and this is, you may think this is right-wing of me, but I think for economic reasons, I think it's important that immigrants learn English, because it's going to hamper them in their ability in jobs, communicating health things, because as a physician, I see that all the time. I think we need to provide intensive services for them as they enter the country. Job, language training, childcare, healthcare. We need to increase the numbers we accept during times of crisis. In World War I, the British took in 250,000 Belgians at a rate of 15,000 a day who were fleeing Kaiser Wilhelm. So we should do something like that. And we need to strengthen the UN. And this is the issue of unintended consequences. So in Rwanda, we waited too long. There were 800,000 slaughtered in 100 days in '94 by the Hutu majority. And in Bosnia, although 100,000 were killed between '92 and '95, we actually put together, Clinton and I forget the wonderful guy who died too young, put together a coalition that stopped that war, the Dayton Peace Accords, and we limited the deaths to 100,000. Still too high, but we could do it. And as I said, 250,000 people died in Syria so far. So we have bombing from the air without fully thinking through the consequences. And I'm sure the Europeans deeply regret their decisions with Libya and Syria and how they handled it. But it's not a black and white issue. I disagree with many of the candidates who think it's a simple issue. So, you know, in Rwanda, we were too late. We got it probably right in Bosnia and Serbia. Certainly, we haven't done a good job in Syria and Libya. So anyways, I'll finish with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Next, we'll have Mary Reynolds-Thompson.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlie. And good morning, everyone. I'm already feeling a little stirred up. When I first heard the title of this panel, I thought of my great-great-grandmother, who was a Romany gypsy. And I kept thinking that she would have said to me, you know, dearie, there are no doors. You know, this is a total man-made construct. The earth doesn't know doors. And I think, too, of the first European immigrants to this country. You know how held down they had been in Europe, how kept from satisfying their own hungers. And so when they arrived on these shores to this vast and plentiful continent, they were insatiable. And how they moved into this land, hungry and destructive, so that the skies, which had once been blackened with passenger pigeons from one horizon to the other, within a few decades, the passenger pigeon was extinct. And I think, and many of us have seen the images of the buffalo, the carcasses rotting all over the prairies and the plains. And of course, as Charlie mentioned, this land was inhabited by the indigenous Native American people who had not mapped their land. They knew where they belonged because that's where their sacred relationship was. They knew it because their hearts spoke to it, their history spoke to it. And we came in, and within a few decades, we had sliced and diced this land with so much what they called the devil's wire, barbed wire, that it could have wrapped around the globe 25 times. So already within the first few decades of settling, the whites settling this country, we were beginning to put up doors. And then I think about my Irish ancestors, who in the mid-19th century came, I think about 1 million of them, fleeing the potato famine. And they came here uneducated, unable to read. They didn't understand the farming practices of America because they had been forced by the English to grow nothing but one kind of potato, which is why they were in all the trouble they were in the first place. And while the door of the country was open, the inner doors were closed. And so all over the place, you would see signs, no dogs, no Irish allowed. And I remember going to Ellis Island and looking at images of my ancestors, these women with beady black eyes, fierce with desire to protect their families, and how hard they fought, and how they too had to take boats over tumultuous waters, many of them dying en route, and what it is to want so badly to care for your family. And then I think about me. You know, I came to America in 1981. I'm white. I speak the language, though they say, you know, we're two countries divided by a common language, but, you know, I got by. And it was 1981, I was 26 years old, and the early 80s, the economy was really bad, but I got a job. And I arrived in New York, and I can still remember wandering around on a blue sky day with streaming silver skyscrapers all around me, thinking, oh my God, you know, this is so exciting, this is so wonderful. And my heart brought me here because England, where I grew up, it was a very closed society then. It's opened up quite a bit, but I was closed tight in a class system that I couldn't breathe in. I just really couldn't breathe in. I couldn't be myself in. And I stayed for a year in New York, and then I was going to visit my brother who was in San Francisco, and then I was going to return to England. Well, one look at San Francisco, and the door of my heart opened. And that's what I want to say too. I think the door is a two-way thing. And when I came across this landscape of California, I knew I'd found my home. Something within that place, even the restlessness, you know, the earth moves there, the plates move. Everything about it somehow mirrored something in my soul. And I think of Ortega y Gasset, who was a Spanish philosopher, and he said, "Tell me the landscape in which you live, and I will tell you who you are." And I think one of the biggest and greatest blessings of a life is to find a landscape that you can call home. And for people who are forced, as we see now, to flee the places that are their homes for reasons that are not their faults, sacrificing so much to get here, it horrifies me how closed our hearts are in danger of becoming to this story, to their stories. Because the trouble is that when we migrate en masse, we cease to be people. You know, we welcome individuals, but we don't do as well in our consciousness with this concept of great streams of migrating people. But those great streams are made up of individuals, each with their own story. We're building walls now. Walls are harder to tear down than doors are to open. I really think in my heart, I'm asking each of us how we keep the doors of our hearts open, because there is fear. You know, when you see, and I've spent quite a bit of time in Europe, which is much less removed from the Syrian crisis than we are in America. And there's a lot of different feeling, and I think we have to own it. There's a lot of fear, and fear is the closer of closers. And so in my closing, I want to share a poem. It's called Prospective Immigrant, Please Take Note. And it's by a wonderful poet called Adrienne Rich. And it's all about this. Either you will go through this door, or you will not go through. If you go through, there is always the risk of remembering your name. Things look at you doubly, and you must look back and let them happen. If you do not go through, it is possible to live worthily, to maintain your attitudes, to hold your position, to die bravely. But much will blind you. Much will evade you. At what cost, who knows? The door itself makes no promises. It is only a door. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for that stirring reflection. Before we move to our next speaker, I did want to remind this audience that we're going to use a system of texting and also index cards. For those of you who prefer the index cards, if you already know you want to ask a question, go ahead and raise your hand so our producer can get the cards to you. For those of you who have cell phone with texting capacity, I've been informed that we can try that out. So let me really briefly give you those instructions because it can take a little time to log in, again, before we move to our next speaker. For those of you who want to text, the first thing you'll need to do is to take out your cell phone and join the session. You'll want to text the number that is over on the posters, which is 37607, and include as your keyword UMC 235. That's the room number that we're in. And then you can go ahead and include a question, keep it brief so that the question doesn't get cut off. And again, if you're a student, include that information in your text message. Okay? I can repeat that at the end of our opening remarks. Let me move to our next speaker, Dr. Reza Ramazani.
Good morning, everyone. As probably some of you know, I'm a product of this wonderful university. And I'm a shameless recruiter as a college professor. So on behalf of the alumni office at CU, I need to do some marketing. Go Buff! Now, argument for and against immigration are much political and moral as they are economics. And as economists, I was planning to concentrate on economic aspect of immigration. My good friend Charlie's already did that job for me. He provided you with some statistics that not all you hear during this election is right. You're looking at the face of immigrant who are sitting here and also in audience. Charlie mentioned, and when I was a little kid in Iran, I always heard United States is a land of opportunity. United States is a land of immigrant. And as economists, when we make a statement, we back it up with facts. I want to find out for myself that is still true. Is there real American in the audience? My definition of a real American is Indian American. If you're Indian American, please raise your hand.
We got 1, 2 over there.
Perfect.
Yay.
So I'm not going to bother you with the numbers and economics, because, I'll probably start snoring myself in the middle of my talk. So I want to share some of my own experience as an immigrant. And I noticed the past few lectures I gave, I think the audience stopped by and asked me, well, it seems you talk from the heart. And I think that's really important to me. And I experienced it in my teaching for the past 30 years. I think the student and the audience notice the difference. When you say something, just you have to say it, but you might not really mean it, versus something comes from the heart. I think it's much more effective. I have my good Iranian friend in the audience, and I might have one of my former professor from CU in the audience. So I grew up in a family not very well educated and not very rich, but very smart. They realized the power and the role of education. They taught us at the early age how powerful education can be, not only to break the vicious circle of poverty and improve your life financially, but education can transform people, make us a better citizen. So my goal was to pursue higher education. When I received my undergraduate in Iran, I always want to go abroad to study, but I didn't have much money. I know you have heard a lot of negative things about the previous regime, the Shah's regime, some of them probably true, but he has done a lot of good things also for Iranian people. And I am the main beneficiary because during the Shah's regime, I was supposed to receive a scholarship from Pahlavi Foundation to come to United States and get my advanced degree. I left Iran, or as I said, my journey started in March 10th, 1977. Young people sitting here and say, it was just, you don't have to laugh, it was just a few years ago, I'm not that old. So I left Iran in March 10, 1977, and the Pahlavi Foundation promised that when I go to the United States, I'm going to receive a scholarship. Unfortunately, as a lot of you know, the revolution started, and I did not receive a penny from the Pahlavi Foundation. I was at a very expensive university at that time, University of Denver, and some people suggested I should move to University of Colorado, a bigger school. They might be more generous, and that was absolutely the case. I'm not the only one. Several of us Iranian, we owe our success, our PhD to this wonderful university, and especially the economics department. And I owe everything I have in terms of being relatively effective teaching to Dr. Ruben Zubro, my role model. Did everything possible for me, and I'm so grateful to Dr. Zubro. So the reason I'm talking from the heart, I said, not all the immigrants are rapists. Not all the immigrants are criminal. All immigrants are not here to take your job away from you. We have legal immigrants, well-educated people, as Charlie mentioned, that contribute a great deal to the success of this country. Now, even if you want to look at the lowest skill, illegal immigrant, they also are a very valuable factor or element for our economic success. I apologize using this example, but when I walk around this beautiful city and I see all these beautiful houses, even some of the lowest skill, illegal immigrant might be contributing to maintenance and beauty of those expensive houses. Another example I want to use is in Vermont. We also have a lot of undocumented, if I can use the politically incorrect term, illegal immigrant. In Vermont, they're doing the type of the jobs that a lot of Americans, they don't want to do. For example, being in Vermont for 30 years, how many Vermonters, they want to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning when it's minus 30 degrees, go and take care of the cows. And I'm very grateful to a progressive state like Vermont that they decided to provide those undocumented workers with a driver license, because I think that helped those people a great deal to have a life and not to live in fear constantly. And finally, I want to say I totally understand that our immigration reform has, I don't know what is the right term I want to use here, politically charged. And I have been here long enough, and it doesn't really make me upset, doesn't make me sad and angry when some people who are running for high office to use immigration as a scapegoat and make type of a statement that is absolutely false. That doesn't bother me. I know it might be shocking. It doesn't bother me because the politician will do anything and will say anything in order to get what they want. But what has saddened me lately, folks, being in this country since 1977, when someone make a false statement, Why so many Americans wrap themselves around the flag and follow those people? A lot of people criticize me, say, Reza, you expect too much from your new country. You have a higher standard for American. And my answer is, you're absolutely correct. I made, and I'm not the only one, I believe all the immigrants, especially the younger one, they make so many sacrifices. It might not be financial, but we left parents, we left loved ones in order to improve the quality of life for ourselves and for our family. So I think I have a right to say I have high expectation for my new country, for my friends. Usually, I'm very good to respond to questions. For the first time, folks, I was speechless. As you know, during one of the debates, I think the candidates were comparing the size of their hands. And one of my brother called from Iran, and he said, I thought our leader is supposed to be stupid like our former president, Mr. Ahmadinejad. What is wrong with you folks? And for the first time, folks, I was speechless. I want to stop and thank you, and it's always wonderful to come back home.
Thank you, Reza, for that very moving reflection. Next, we have Zainab Zeb Khan.
Thank you, and I'll keep this a little short. There's this, I don't know how this quote goes, but it's basically along the lines of, don't ever make fun of somebody that speaks with an accent. They know they speak a different language. And that is so true. I am the daughter of 2 immigrants. My father came here in the late 50s from Afghanistan. My mother's family originated from North India. She was born in Pakistan after the partition, and then emigrated to the United States with her family in the late 60s, early 70s. And so the concept, very similar to what Reza had said, when my parents came here, they adopted a brand new identity, an American identity. And I think the issue, really what I want to kind of touch base on today is the human perspective of integration, assimilation, and what the immigrant experience is for people cross-culturally, not just from the Middle East or from a particular native region. Obviously, because we have the refugee crisis, this is definitely a lot more of a pressing issue. However, I believe that it's the human experiences and the personal narratives that we hold that really make the fabric of American society today, very similar to what Raza had mentioned. For me, I grew up almost as a third spacer. So I was born and raised in the United States. I held on to American values, but then at the same time, I saw my peers and what some of the struggles they may have had because their parents, even though ethnicity-wise were similar, maybe held different values and almost clung on to values that maybe perhaps didn't serve their children in the best way possible. And so I almost grew up viewing, split identities and dual identities. So, sneak out on dates. Can I go to prom? Am I allowed to wear this? And I see that still even so much today as I was working with survivors of domestic violence. Majority of them were South Asian or Arabic, I think simply by default because of my name. And I realized that not just what they were going through, but there were much larger issues of integration and assimilation and kind of a push and a pull of what is acceptable, what can I leave, what can I adopt, and where do I fit in as a sense of belonging and identity. And I think, everybody's experiences are going to be different. I mean, I also have I've met, very, very prominent physicians that were coming from, Pakistan and who are now driving taxis in New York to make a living and to make ends meet. So it goes beyond just the cultural identity, but also your lifestyle and forming, and also in a very powerful way. I mean, for my father, America was the land of opportunity and resources, and he knew that he could not raise a family in Afghanistan in areas where it was still very, this was before the Taliban, so it still was pretty progressive per se, but it still wasn't a place where he could raise a family. And it wasn't a place where he saw his children being able to have the opportunities to success. And so he came to the United States and carved out an entire new blueprint on life. And so I just essentially want to wrap this up because I know I see so many different types of faces in the audience, and I'm sure everybody's experiences and views are going to be, I think it's a mosaic of different narratives, and I think just essentially what Charles had said earlier, we're all in this together. So thank you for allowing me the platform to share just a minuscule bit of my story.
Thank you to all of our panelists for their opening remarks. I want to remind you that the next phase of our session will be to open it to audience questions. And again, we're going to use a system of index cards and texting. Just to repeat the instructions for texting, the index card system is pretty simple. Put your hand up if you would like an index card. If you want to text, what you need to do is to open the session, join it, send a text message to the 5-digit number 37607, as is listed on the poster. You want to include the keyword UMC 235, and once you receive a confirmation message, you'll type the keyword UMC 235, our room number. Okay, keep your questions brief in the text messages so that they don't get cut off, and indicate on that message if you are a student so that we can give you priority in the questioning. Just to give us a moment to get ourselves organized, I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative of asking the first question. Michael Walzer, who is one of the great social theorists of our time, has said before that immigration is a system of open neighborhoods within a bounded political community, so that countries at once have the right to define those boundaries, but also have certain obligations based in justice to the people who are within that community once it's been defined. This question could go to anyone, but maybe I'll direct it to Zainab and Charlie in particular, given the service that you do with immigrant communities. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on the duality of that open neighborhood and the closed boundaries in the work that you perform with immigrants.
All right. Okay. I'll take a crack. I don't know that since I'm not a social theorist, that I understand. I'm more concrete. I know how to do a good rectal exam. So, so I'll try to say what I think. So I think that it's interesting if you look at in both state government departments and federal government departments, there's two that have no problems with undocumented people within the borders of the United States. One is obviously revenue, Treasury, because they pay a lot of taxes. They don't care where the money comes from, they just want the money. Two is the health departments, because they realize if you scare people, then they're not going to come forward. If they're sick, if they have communicable disease, they won't get vaccinated, and that will lead to problems for the rest of Americans. So I think that's sort of an important 2 points to make. In the clinic, these are people, they're not just Spanish speaking, they're people who are parents of American-born, of foreign origin, but they're American-born, and they come over here and they're undocumented. They overstay their visas because they want to be with their children. They're older, they're sick, and they want to be with their children. I think that, I think it's important. The other thing is that these, going back to how they reinvigorate the United States, we know the baby boomer generation, 10,000 people retire each day. in the United States, and they need Social Security and Medicare paid for. Well, that doesn't come from what they paid 30 years ago. It comes from the people who are working today. So when we bring in these immigrants who are paying their Social Security taxes, who are paying Medicare, they're taking care of us, because we didn't make enough babies to take care of us. So we need the immigrants, and just enlightened self-interest, to take care of us. So anyways, I'll end there. I don't know if I answered your question. What? Yes. Okay.
I just, could you repeat the question again so I could frame it?
Sure. The question was about the tension between having open neighborhoods to immigrants who are in the United States,
Okay.
while on the other hand, maintaining the closed political boundaries that are the right of a nation to define.
Sure. I think that's a very important question. I mean, I'll try to answer it to the best of my ability. I know it just psychologically and sociologically, people tend to, when they are coming to a new territory, a new land, a new language, they go where there's familiarity. I think that's just human nature. You go where what you're familiar with. So that's why I think in the United States we have pockets of communities, like for example in Minneapolis, there's a very strong, pretty large Somalian community that's very active. They contribute very valuably to American society. I know in Fresno, California, there's a huge Afghan refugee community as well, Oakland, California as well, and all across the United States. And I think what, like I said, I don't know if this kind of answers your question, but what we're seeing is it's essentially a revolving door. There are very strong communities in areas of the U.S. of immigrant populations, but I think it's because familiarity is cultivated and there's some sort of a sense of belonging. And I mean, the door should be a revolving door. I think people evolve through their immigrant experience. I don't think they per se get fixated or stuck in one niche, and that's what shows growth, I think, in a society.
You know, I like to distinguish between revolving door and completely open door. You know, as an immigrant, you know, this country accepted me with open heart and open mind. And I think this country has been good to me, and I think I need to return a favor. I need to be good to this country. That's the reason I have higher expectation for myself and my fellow immigrant. I remember vividly when my daughter was very young, and I think it was during the summer there was a riot in Paris when most of the immigrants were very upset, and they were looting and burning, you know, and she was very upset listening to the news and said, well, Dad, this is really not right. You know, people should have a right to live anywhere they want to live. And as an economist, I couldn't really accept that statement. I said, well, I don't want to hurt your feeling, but this is a teaching moment. So, and I thought for a young lady who's going to be a teenager very soon, it's important to understand about the fact of a scarcity and limitation. So explain it to her that every country has a limited resources. And if we have an open door policy and accept everyone, if we don't have the resources, we cannot educate them. We cannot provide them with the healthcare. Something similar happened in Paris or in France. You bring these people, you know, you have an open door policy. You don't do anything for them. You put them in the ghetto, you treat them like animal, then obviously, unfortunately, forgive me, they were going to act like one. So as an immigrant, I speak for myself, I have an obligation to do everything accordingly and do not give any excuse to someone who doesn't like immigrant to use me as a scapegoat. Now, one more thing, you know, I think it's important also when we immigrate to a new country. I'm not saying forget about language or culture or religion, but also we are guests in the new country. We have to accept the rules. We should accept the culture. And I don't think those two are mutually exclusive. We can respect the culture of the United States, which I try to do, and also hold on to my beautiful Persian culture by celebrating Persian New Year every March.
I think this question from a student follows up nicely on Reza's comments. And I'll direct it to Mary just because I think it picks up on a conversation we were having before the panel. The student asks, is it more important for immigrants to adopt American values or to hold on to their own culture?
Wow, that's a big question. And I think Reza really spoke so beautifully to it that it's not an either or. And I actually think this is one of the big traps that we fall into, and more so, that if we think something is right, then something else has to be wrong. What is that? Why isn't it yes and? And I think about London. I grew up right in the heart of London. And when I grew up, I was born in 1956, not long after the war. And it was London is a fabulous city, but it was rather dull. We were very white and we were very full of ourselves because we'd, fought the Nazis and we were suffering and we were still some food stamps around the place. And we were sort of breathing our own fumes. And now I go back to London and it is the melting pot that we dream about, because it somehow, in other parts of the country, it's worked and it also hasn't worked. But in London, we were porous. What we were was open, so that we started to create these incredible juxtapositions of music and poetry and language and food and people. Everybody's intermarrying. You don't even think twice about interracial couples all over the place. Every child now is the most gorgeous kind of gumbo of ingredients. And it is totally alive. And I love going to museums in London because you see the nice ladies from the English countryside who arrive in their flower dresses, all frightfully nice. And then you see people going through if I'm pronouncing it correctly, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that Habibs is that how you say the...
Hijab.
So,
You mean cover?
the cover.
Hijab.
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 Hijab. And you just see this feast of multiculturalism. And you see what's possible. And, nature loves diversity. The more diverse an ecosystem, the more vibrant an ecosystem. It doesn't thrive on, and we're so monolithic in our thinking. We're getting so thinking it has to be my way or the highway, that we are literally endangering ourselves. And so, yes, embrace the values that matter. There are a lot of values that America stands for that I don't want to embrace, and I'm sure there are some for you too. So I don't think we have to sign on for everything. But what we need to do is bring the fullness of ourselves to each other. And through that, and the willingness to stay with the discomfort of that in moments, we can create something new.
I'd like to combine what actually is now 3 student questions asking about a similar theme. And I think, Riza, you might be a good one to open this, but anyone can join in. The question is, how has Islamophobia affected how you've been able to progress within the United States? And 2 related questions, possibly related questions. How do we maintain the moral integrity of immigration in the United States while protecting the homeland from possible terrorists?
That's a very good question. Let me try to answer the first one. I think, let me start with a true story. Everybody at my school, everybody at this college, I guess they know me by my first name, Reza, and the last name is Ramazani. I think I don't remember exactly how long ago. I was traveling with my wife and my daughter. We were in Detroit. the airport. And it was the same day, I believe, that they cut underwear bomber. Was that the right term?
Yeah.
Yes. So as always, I purchased my ticket usually using the usual name, Reza Ramazani. My wife and my daughter went through the security, no problem. The older gentleman stopped me and said, well, you have a problem. I said, what kind of a problem? He said, I look at your driver license, the name on the driver license, and your ticket doesn't match. The driver license used my name that I have in my passport when I left Iran, and that's, are you ready? Mohammad Reza Ramazani. Said, you're in big trouble, but because you're traveling with your family, you're old, I think I want to give you a break. See, there are some advantages being old, folks, and that was one of them. So he told me, obviously, you have to, change your name. Your ticket has to be consistent with the name on the license. And I teach statistics, and in order to meaningful statistical research, your sample should be unbiased, and we randomly select a group of people from population to do a meaningful research to do the reduce biases. So folks, since then, every time I travel, guess what happens? I open my luggage, and you see that wonderful card that my luggage has been randomly selected. I don't know if there is a cause and effect. I'm just saying. And that's, I think, is a part of a story. And I think, again, we know, again, I am, be honest with you, I am paranoid to use my name, my first name, Muhammad, And I think that's very unhealthy, and I think shouldn't be. But at the same time, especially we have young people in the audience, I said, I understand it. It's painful for me, But I learned to accept it. It's a reality of life. And unfortunately, a lot of bad people, they have done a lot of bad things in the name of Islam that unfortunately some people are generalizing. Another example, when I go to DMV to renew my license, so when they is ready, you're sitting with a lot of people, be honest with you, and then they call you to come pick it up at the window. So guess what they call? They call Muhammad. And I'm a little bit confused. I look around. Are they talking to me? Is it me? And then when I get up and go and pick it up, I know sometimes, be honest with you, I get the look. And I teach at the Liberal Art College. I have a lot of international students. We have some African-American students. African-American students always told me, so we feel uncomfortable when we go to the fancy store because we get the look. I said, you guys are exaggerating. You don't know what the heck you're talking about. But I know what they're talking about now. But, to answer the second part of the question, if I'm not really, I don't know if I'm answering the second part of the question, but the thing is, we also have a responsibility, if we call ourselves Muslim, to change the heart and the mind American. Exactly what we're doing. Look at the face of an immigrant. And I think we've got to do the same thing. So we don't have a Muslim community, and I'm not practicing Muslim, so I'm really not qualified to answer that question. But I think the Muslim population in this country, they have the responsibility to be more active and prove some of an informed American that not all Muslims are terrorists. And again, if I may say that, I think I'm probably, I got to be a little bit careful. We didn't have any of this problem with the stupid ISIS 10, 15 years ago. And I'm not blaming anybody, but I think sometimes I ask myself a question. Did U.S. foreign policy the past 10, 15 years, did anything that causes or contribute to this type of a problem? I really don't know the answer. Probably you guys much smarter than I am, probably. You can probably connect the dots and see if there is a possibility.
Zainab, do you want to speak to that too?
Well, that's a great question, and Raza gave a really fabulous anecdote and story to go with it. I'm stopped in the airport all the time too, but it's kind of a lifestyle. I just pack smarter, so. I think there is but all kidding aside, I think there is a big problem in terms of coming back to integration, assimilation, identity, the very recent issue of, ISIS recruiting young Muslim Americans through social media. There's obviously, I think there's the theological approach, there's an identity sense of belonging, there's a victimhood narrative, there's all sorts of various factors that are playing into this. And it's not to say that people are susceptible or malleable and making excuses. No, there should be much more of a stronger responsibility, I think, within Muslim communities to actually take a stand against this and say that we're not allowing this to happen in our communities. And unfortunately, that's kind of the label and the baggage that's carried on. But no, I think that there really is no specific answer other than we definitely need to be a lot more proactive, and we need to work together on this.
Thank you. I have a question. Should refugees, and the question specifies from Syria, although I think the question could be asked broadly, should refugees be allowed to the United States? What would be the best way to welcome them to America? I don't know who wants to start with that.
Well, yes. And I think in times of crisis, many of these people, they want to go home. That's where their hearts are. They'll want to go home. And I think, yes, they should be welcomed in times of crisis. And we need to provide services for them. I think bad things happen if you drop people in the U.S.
Yeah.
But there are very good agencies. So I'm Jewish, but I give money to Lutheran Family Services, who are famous for 60 years now, I think dating back to the Vietnam era, of integrating things. They have houses for them. They help them find jobs. They get financial support through both federal and private donations and things like that. So I think so the answer is yes, and you need to provide services for them so that they can integrate. And if they want to go home, then when things are better in their home country, then you need to help them get home too.
My answer also is yes, but I think at the same time, I hope you folks don't get upset when I said we also have to be a little bit careful, because some bad people using refugees as an excuse to come to this country, or especially in the case of Germany, to go things and do bad things, which happened, I think, recently in Germany. And I think that is going to have a negative effect on immigration in general. So I think we have to develop a system of check and balances. And I don't want to really preach about the completely open door immigration policy. There has to be a system of check and balances.
You know, I'd just like to add one thing to that. We haven't begun to see the beginning of the refugee crisis. This is so connected to climate change, and you can even track some of the Syrian crisis back to climate change. So we really have to be mindful here, because this is the beginning of a problem that is not going to go away. We are going to be dealing with vast migrations of populations from areas that have become uninhabitable due to climate change. So this is an opportunity really for the very best minds, and I would say hearts, and artists and poets and all the other people. I mean, I love government agencies and health agencies, and all of these things are really important. But I think people in the arts and other areas also have a responsibility to see how we can begin to help and welcome and integrate people, because a lot of this is going to be about helping people find the thread of their own stories within their new communities. And those of us involved in the arts are really quite good at helping people express and create and work with issues of identity.
Again, I'm going to combine a few student questions. What are your feelings on immigration enforcement right now, and the danger that it poses to undocumented immigrants? And we have a related question, perhaps a more pointed question. What can be said about the ICE detention centers where undocumented immigrants and asylum seekers, especially women and children, are being physically and sexually abused?
It's terrible. I don't know. It's just very upsetting. I think that I have no problem with, I'll give you an example. Stories, I think, anecdotes are always good. As a physician, when I was at UNC a short year ago, remember in the early days we had, I had two undocumented patients. One was a guy who was a gun-toting violent person who threatened me and the staff, and the other was this very sweet, gay, Spanish-speaking young man. We notified the immigration folks about the violent guy. Nothing happened. So we had to get security involved in the hospital, police, whenever he stepped foot. It was just terrible. In the meantime, they swooped up this young, innocent, sweet guy and deported him. So I just don't know what we're doing. And I think, to have a heart, I agree with Reza that we need to have, you have to be circumspect, and I have no problem with deporting felons, and getting them out. But, our detention centers have to be safe. Splitting up families is stupid. It's bad.
Here's a question from a community member. How do you understand the fear that so many people have of immigrants? And I think this is an interesting twist in the question. What compassion do you have for the fearful?
Well, I'm going to say something like that because the students ask me at UNC all the time. And I think this is more broadly. It's not just immigrants. I think what we're seeing in the United States now is the last dying gasp of old white men. And of course, I'm an old white man. So I think they're frightened of people of other religions. They're frightened of people of different skin colors. They're frightened. The idea of transgender just freaks them out. So they're just scared. They don't like these ideas. They don't like these people. And so I think that's what we're seeing. And it's going to change in the United States. And I do have compassion for them. And I think that, one of the things we're seeing in both the Sanders supporters and the Trump supporters, that people are just fed up. So the Republican elite, having their champagne in the Hamptons and plotting what they're going to do, have been ignoring. And what are the two things that the blue-collar white men are afraid of? They're afraid of immigration reform, and they don't like free trade. And the Republicans have been blowing that off, and that's where Trump wins. And similarly, the Democrats have not addressed income inequality enough, and college debt and all this other stuff, and that scares them as well. So I have great sympathy for them, and I blame the elites of both parties for not paying close enough attention.
Yeah.
The best way to blame your mistake and your problems, create an imaginary enemy. I guess we did it with former Soviet Union for many, many years in order to unite ourselves. And I'm not really surprised. I think this is one way, to direct American anger, not on the type of economic policy, what type of mistake will be made in the social term or political term. I think we're looking for scapegoats. And as I told you before, I have seen it for the past God knows how many years in this country, and I'm not surprised. So we need to educate young people that there is no difference between the darker skin and the white skin. If you just cut my skin, you will see the color of blood is exactly the same. I have the same feeling. I want the same thing for myself and my family that every single one of you want. Okay? And be honest with you, there is not that much difference between you and I. And I have international students, they're very shy, there are very few of them. They don't want to speak up in class because they're worried about their accent. You know what I do? I have a dry sense of humor, which probably is useful being a college professor. We have a lot of students from Massachusetts and New York, and a lot of the kids want to know about my nationality. I tell them I'm from El Paso, Texas. And I tell them, in this class, you gotta talk, you gotta participate. And I have no problem understanding your accent. Even if you're from Boston Garden and you talk funny because you are not able to pronounce R completely. I have no problem with it.
Following this line of questioning, here's a question from a student. Which presidential candidate do you believe would most benefit immigration reform? And a related question, which of the proposed policies do you think would be the most effective for immigration reform? Nobody is immediately jumping in here.
Well, we know who isn't going to be the best for immigration reform. We can probably all agree on that one. I won't go further than that.
I think it's unclear. As candidates, some people are quite clear in stating, and I think the current two front-runners in the Republican Party, Cruz and Trump, are obviously very much against immigration, and they talk about building borders, strengthening walls. They want walls in women's uteruses and on the border, both. And on the Democratic side, I think that it's in the Democrats' interest, whoever gets the nomination, to quickly push for incorporation and a legal path to citizenship. And I think you will find that depending on what happens, the Republicans actually in the Senate will jump on board on that, because they know that they'll never ever win the White House unless they provide a path to citizenship for the undocumented in the United States.
I just want to say, I think I don't have a clue, but I think, the immigration reform probably is going to be much more beneficial for the Democrat than Republican.
I'm going to put Riza back on the stand for this one. Should services, just given your economics background, should services for immigrants be provided by governments or by nonprofits?
Well, I think government should provide those services for the people, because in the short run it's going to cost us a lot of money, and as economists who believe and practice and preach a scarcity, that's the reason I was a little bit hesitant, to jump in, and try to answer your question right away. So I think it makes sense for government to do it, even if the cost at the beginning goes up. I think I have a good answer. Because by providing basic services, I think Charlie mentioned it at the beginning of his talk, this is not a charity, folks. And sometimes, honest to God, the immigrant doesn't want the charity. They need some help at the beginning to get it started. Right. Mm-hmm. What they want from you to practice what you preach. When you say this is a land of opportunity, we want evidence. Give us the chance. We prove ourselves. So I think makes a lot of sense. And as economists, I'm not a fan of government, folks. But I think this is one of the areas that is a great investment for government, because the rate of return in the long run is going to be high. By educating these people, by providing with the healthcare, we are producing human capital that is going to produce a lot of goods and services and contribute to my social security when I'm on the beach and enjoying myself.
So I disagree a little bit. I would add that I think it's both. The answer is both, because I think that integration into community, the government can only do so much. But when you get individual private entities who are embedded within the community, churches and mosques and synagogues, etc., they can help connect people with neighbors, with, friends who, oh, my buddy, owns the Chevy dealership and he's willing to hire someone, things like that. So I think it needs to be both, because the government isn't going to have the connection to the Chevy dealership, so. Anyway.
Good point. I agree.
I agree with that too. And I think that the services overall should be comprehensive and then also connected. So that way you can gauge and measure impact, results. And then also, like I had said earlier, it's an evolution. The whole immigration process, the assimilation, the integration, the building up, starting with the focus point of just helping people get on their feet, having them learn how to drive, basic English skills, so that they have autonomy over what they're going to be doing. Because at the end of the day, that's how you help people come to their feet, is if they are equipped with the proper resources and opportunities to provide for their families, to get around, to not be dependent on any other sources.
I'm going to address this question initially to Mary. What do you see as the role of education in discussing immigration issues? I'm broadening education to consciousness raising, which is why I was thinking of you.
Yeah, it's interesting because, this whole idea of education as kind of leading people forth into something. I know I did a project a few years ago working with principals in California schools, and literally over the course of less than a decade, the demographics of their schools have been completely and utterly transformed from, in some cases, all white English-speaking kids to 80% Spanish-speaking kids, literally from one year to the next. And, that's an overwhelming situation to be put in. And there again, this is where the resources become so incredibly important. But I think education has to be about sharing each other's history and sharing each other's values and cultures. I mean, just to expect that immigrants will come here and learn about American history, if it's anything like the way I learned English history, you'd really think that the English had done nothing wrong in their entire history of the country, right? I was really shocked when I began to find out about the shadow side of the British Empire. I mean, I'm not kidding. So I think there's an incredible opportunity for us to become global citizens through education, so that we are learning from each other rather than just assuming that people who come to this country need to learn about us. That's all I say.
We have two questions from the community that I think can be asked nicely together. What can we as individuals do to help the refugees who are flooding out of Syria? I feel ashamed that we are so blessed with houses, heat, clean water, and freedom. And a second question, many Boulderites would like to host refugees, but there are not very many avenues to do that. How can we open doors here in Boulder?
So, it's a complicated issue, and I think it's great. Those are both great versions of a similar question. So, in each state and geographic areas, there are non-governmental organizations that handle refugees, that the government works directly with, provides funding to, and they raise private money. And they have a very good system. They've been doing it for decades on how to get people. They meet them at the airport. They, provide services right from the get-go, including the first meal is cooked by someone. So if it's a Syrian, they cook a Syrian meal the first night and things like that. So down to that level. So it's a really good system. I think that it's great that you want to volunteer your homes. There's two huge issues in Boulder. You are a very, very expensive community, okay? So where are they going to get a job and where are they going to live afterwards? Yeah. And it's great that you're generous in that. But both of these agencies, they might place someone in your home for 2 days, but they discourage any long-term thing. They want these people up and independent. That's possible in Raleigh, North Carolina. Not very possible in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, or Boulder, Colorado. So that's your problem. I think it's fine to volunteer. In North Carolina, the main agency is Lutheran Family Services. Contact them. How can I help your wealthy community? Give them money, and they'll tell you exactly where your dollars are going. Yeah. And then volunteer, get someone to cook that first meal, meet them at the airport, take them out for lunch, help them get a job, et cetera, et cetera.
We have something very similar that Charlie's described in Vermont, and usually I help with some of the refugees from Afghanistan because they speak Pashto, which is very similar from my native language. But we have a similar challenge, and one of the challenges we have in Vermont, as you know, the winter in Vermont is very cold, and a lot of refugees, they don't like the weather. So, but they stay, for a couple of years, they improve their language, they improve their skill, and then usually move, to the other state like California, because as you mentioned, Zainab, they have some family connection. Yeah. But I think what Charlie said absolutely makes a lot of sense. For example, greet them at the airport, provide them with some clothes, especially if you cook them their native food. I think they're going to be very grateful.
All right, we have 4 minutes left in this session. And that gives each of our panelists maybe 30 to 45 seconds if you want to say something in closing. Would anyone like to? There's a prompt from the audience that I thought could be a nice way to close if anyone would like to speak to it. On this panel, we have 3 panelists who are themselves immigrants and one who is the child of U.S. immigrants. At what point did you consider yourself to be an American?
I don't know that I entirely do today. I think that's the truth of it. I feel bifurcated, and I think that's actually a very wondrous place to be. I don't wrestle with the 2 sides of myself anymore. I kind of appreciate going back and forth. There's a door between them.
And I was a young boy when I was naturalized, so I just only knew myself. My parents emigrated, but I know my parents felt American immediately. I mean, they moved to the United States because they were still fearful of what the Nazis had done in Europe, and they immediately plunged in and got involved in the civil rights movement because they were horrified. So they embraced this country wholeheartedly from the moment they stepped foot.
That's a tough question for me. I told you I came here in 1977, and I was just talking to Chan. I'm not an American citizen. I'm still a legal alien. I have a green card. Because I'm torn. I feel I'm a nomad. I love them both. And I mean it, this is not exaggerating. I love the US as much as I love Iran. And I used to go to Iran when my parents arrived. And I never forget, one day I told my older brother, I don't like it here. I want to go home. He got extremely upset. He told me, you son of X, Y, and Z. What do you mean home? This is your home. And when I'm here, especially during the holidays, I miss the other country. So that's very, very difficult for me. And people ask me, look, something wrong with you. You live in this country, you benefit from everything, that this country provided. And I think this is un-American. I don't think that's un-American. I think it is possible. You love both U.S. and your native country, in this case, Iran. And my dream is, folks, before I die, to see the relationship between these 2 wonderful countries get back to normal. Same relationship we had maybe 30, 40 years ago. Thank you for the opportunity. I had a great time. Thank you.
Why don't we end there? Thank you all for joining us. If you did use the text messaging, you want to remember to close your session before you head to your next. Otherwise, thank you for enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you too.
Charlie, thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
Playing the role of economist today, that was great. You made my life much easier.